This is Radio 84 MHz, broadcasting from the bustling streets and hidden alleys of Vietnam. You are tuning into the frequency of authentic stories and unfiltered vibe.
Today we follow Mark, the American investor who saw the Mekong Delta as nothing more than a swamp of low-value commodities. He came to Vietnam to find land for a high-tech factory, but instead he found himself trapped in a rice field facing a truth that would shatter his Wall Street arrogance. Presenting Vietnamese rice, just a low-value commodity. The moment I tried to buy a swamp. Don't forget to subscribe for more hidden gems. And tell us below, has a stranger's kindness ever changed your mind? Now let's listen. I still clearly recall the terrible humid heat of the Mekong Delta whipping through the window of the helicopter. Even after 3 major storylines in Vietnam, my arrogance, the ego of a Wall Street investor, hadn't diminished. I had seen the kindness, I had seen the culture, but I still hadn't seen the future of money. "Look down there, Mark John," my local partner said through the headset. "Beautiful, isn't it? The nation's rice bowl." I glanced through the anti-glare pane. Yes, rice. Thousands upon thousands of emerald green rice paddies intersected by winding canals. It looked picturesque, but through my lens it was just a waste of resources. "Beautiful, John," I retorted with a cold, almost mocking tone. "What do I see?" "I see prime industrial land with low labor and operating costs being used to grow. One of the lowest value commodities in the world. We are here to find 100 hectares of industrial land for a semiconductor chip project. I sincerely hope you are not suggesting I buy this rice field to build a factory." I sighed, turning to John. "Let's be clear, I am an American investor. My standard is net profit. The agricultural sector of Vietnam is simply not on my radar. It's backward, John. It only serves the domestic market, or cheap mass export. It has no strategic global role apart from filling the bellies of a few poorer nations." This trip was a formality. I had to go through the motions of visiting the Mekong Delta land so John could feel like he'd done his job. But in my mind, the decision was already made. The land here was too soft, too remote, and far too agricultural. 2 days later, I sat in a cramped meeting room in Can Tho. It wasn't the luxury I expected in Saigon or Hanoi, but a mix of old architecture and attempted modernization. 7 serious faces representing the local authority and a large cooperative were looking at me. A man in his 52nds with determined eyes and calloused hands, clearly a farmer turned manager, began his presentation in Vietnamese. John translated, "We are proposing a Smart Agriculture 4 project, Mr. Mark. We call it the seed of the future. Our goal is not just to increase yield, but to build a sustainable value chain with strong ESG, environmental, social, and governance principles for Vietnamese rice." I smirked. ESG, sustainable, glossy Silicon Valley buzzwords being uttered by a man who faintly smelled of soil. The man continued presenting slides on new salt-resistant rice varieties, the use of drones for pest monitoring and water reduction techniques. As he spoke, his voice was filled with palpable pride. "Our biggest objective," he said, his voice ringing, "is to help Vietnamese rice become the world's indispensable food source in the face of climate change. We believe our rice can feed millions of foreigners and save them from hunger. This is not just a business, it is a national mission." That was enough. I leaned back in my chair, interlaced my hands, and interrupted him mid-sentence. "Sir, I'm sorry, what was your name again?" "I am Bay, chairman of the Thuan Thien Cooperative, Mr. Bay. With all due respect, there was of course none. You are drastically off topic. I came here to discuss land for a chip manufacturing facility, a multi-billion-dollar industry, a sector that defines the future. You are talking to me about rice, something that has existed for thousands of years." I took a deep breath, my voice now laced with my characteristic impatience and arrogance. "Let's be clear about my prejudice, because I believe in transparency. From a Wall Street perspective, Vietnamese rice is a typical commodity product. It's simple, easily substitutable, and lacks strategic added value. What's the retail price for 1 kilo of your rice? $2, $3. A small chip the size of my pinky nail is worth more than a ton of the rice you might produce in a season. I turned to John. John, translate this verbatim. I want them to understand this clearly. Mr. Bay, I don't doubt your patriotism or the diligence of Vietnamese farmers. But diligence is not a business model. The sustainability, you speak of the ESG, those are nice keywords to please social activists, not shareholders. I don't see technology. I see traditional flooded paddies. I see a high-risk, low-return business model completely dependent on nature. I looked directly into Mr. Bay's eyes, which maintained a surprisingly calm demeanor. I will be blunt. I have the prejudice that Vietnamese agriculture, especially the rice industry, is a backward, small-scale sector lacking technology and only producing a low-value commodity having no strategic role in the global food supply chain. And nothing in your presentation has given me a shock or changed that view. I had expected a fiery response, a strong rebuttal. Instead, silence filled the room. Finally, one of the local officials spoke, his voice soft but tinged with bitterness. Mr. Mark, we understand the investor's perspective, but have you ever wondered if it's just a cheap commodity? Why is Vietnam the world's second-largest rice exporter? And why do many American and European nations use our rice strains for their own breeding programs? That's volume I. Dismissed immediately. China exports many things too, but that doesn't make their products strategically valuable. That's the law of the commodity game, selling massive quantities with razor-thin margins. Mr. Bay is talking about technology. I don't see technology. I see a model that needs to be replaced by industrial parks. That's the life in Vietnam. I want to invest in a country that is rising from agriculture to high-tech. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through a contract. I am ready to purchase the 100-hectare plot we discussed. That land is currently under rice cultivation. We will convert the land use, fill it, and build the infrastructure. That is where real value-generating profit and jobs are created for Vietnam, not in planting rice. I stood up unilaterally, ending the meeting. I appreciate your time. John, send them the literature on my high-tech development fund. That's where they should be focusing their energy. As I walked out, I had the satisfying feeling of someone who had spoken the uncomfortable truth. These people were too naive, too attached to the old culture. They needed a reality shock to understand that the modern world is not fed by sentiment, but by profit optimization. I thought to myself, I once admired the resilience of the Vietnamese people, but that resilience seems to only belong in past stories. In modern economics, only pragmatism wins. I got into the car, the luxury SUV, speeding past the lush green rice fields. To me, every grain of rice waving outside the window was a wasted opportunity cost. I came to Vietnam to invest in the future, and the future for me was not Vietnamese food or agricultural fairy tales. It was chips, AI, and disruptive technology. I called my lawyer in New York. Initiate the land transfer process in the Mekong Delta. I want that plot cleared and ready for groundbreaking in 3 months. I don't want to see a single grain of rice on it anymore. Let's turn that commodity swamp into digital gold. This was the prejudice. This was the arrogance. And this was why I was Mark. I had set myself up for the perfect trap where my naivety was about to be punished by an unimaginable shock. The decision to buy and flatten the rice field felt like a general winning his first battle. The paperwork was moving forward. It's business, not war, I told myself. But reality is a harsh mistress. My expensive, specialized SUV rented from Saigon sank deep into a muddy embankment while trying to take a shortcut to survey the plot. My driver, a young man named Phuc, went pale. Damn it, Phuc, what the hell is this? I roared, my frustration boiling over. Mr. Mark, the soil here is very soft. We must have taken the wrong path. Phuc worriedly tried to make a phone call. I slammed the car door open, ignoring the fact that my expensive Italian leather shoes were instantly swallowed by the mud. I looked around. No tractor, no passerby, just rice. Rice and silence. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. This is the very civilization I'm trying to replace. No roads, no infrastructure, no efficiency. What a shock to the logistics system. I stood there for over an hour in the fierce sun, feeling like a totally out-of-place American, a useless foreigner in a landscape I had openly scorned. As I mentally cursed this slow life in Vietnam, a small convoy of rice trucks began moving toward a nearby collection point. It was situated right on the canal bank, about 200 meters from us. I decided to walk over, not to ask for help, but to observe the backward agricultural model I was about to wipe out. I saw Mr. Bay, the chairman of Thuan Tin Cooperative, standing there with a man in the white uniform of a major export company. I recognized their logo. They supplied rice to a high-end supermarket chain in Switzerland. Mr. Bay was in a tense exchange with the company representative. "I'm sorry, Bay," the representative said, his tone calm but firm. "This 20-ton batch, we cannot accept it at A-grade price. The quick test shows the cadmium content exceeds the strict Swiss standard by 0.001%. Just 0.1%. You know the rules. It will have to be reclassified as B-grade and the price drops by 25%. I heard it clearly through John, who had also waded through the mud to stand beside me. Just 0.001%. Is he insane? I whispered. That's a statistical error. That batch is still A-grade for 99% of the world market. A 25% price drop just for a tiny fraction of metal. That's absurd. Completely impractical. Mr. Bay froze, but then he nodded slowly. I understand. I accept. I thought, great. He's going to lose a quarter of his profit for a ridiculous standard. This is proof of business inefficiency. I waited for Mr. Bay to react in the business way. I understood trying to negotiate, bribe, or at least beg. But then the unexpected happened. Mr. Bay didn't argue about the price or the standard. Instead, he spoke, his voice almost trembling with disappointment, but not about the money. I accept the B-grade price for these 20 tons because it is my Thet-Bai failure. But I have another request. He wasn't asking for leniency. He was asking for the opposite. Hi, the company representative. I know your company has the best agricultural technology engineers. Can you send 2 engineers to stay with us here for the next 3 days? I need them to re-examine the entire cultivation process from start to finish to find the exact root cause of that 0.001%. I need to know why my rice couldn't achieve the absolute perfect quality I promised. Hai was surprised. Bay, what are you saying? This will cost my company money and you've already lost money on this batch. Why don't you just sell it on the domestic market for a slightly higher price than B-grade and try again next season, mister? Bay shook his head, looking straight at Hai, then looking out at his lush green rice fields. His gaze was not that of a farmer calculating profits, but of a man defending his honor. Hai, this batch is my failure. If I sell it to the domestic market for an easy profit, it means I am giving myself a pass, and giving a pass on the name of Vietnamese rice that we have worked to build for over 20 years. It's not about the money or the 25%. It's about our reputation. Mr. Bay continued, his voice now slow and philosophical, as if speaking about the culture of a nation. The Swiss customers buy our rice because they trust our absolute standard. If one grain is imperfect, even by 0.1%, that is a shock to that trust. We Vietnamese farmers do not grow a commodity high. We grow food, and our food must nourish the world in the safest way possible. I would rather take a loss today to ensure the quality for the next 10 years. Send your people here. I will pay all their accommodation and their wages. I stood there stunned. My entire prejudice was just blown away by a small event unrelated to Wall Street, unrelated to chips or technology. Mark, he refused the easier money. He accepted a loss to protect an invisible standard, a standard that was only 0.001% higher. Who does that? I recalled what I had said in the meeting. Diligence is not a business model. Sustainability is just pretty keywords. But this wasn't a keyword. This was action. They were prioritizing absolute quality, reputation, people over instant profit. That was a concept that simply did not exist in the Wall Street lexicon. If it were me, I'd sell the B grade immediately and quietly figure out the problem later. Who cares about 0.001%? I looked at John. His face was equally astonished. What do you see, Mark? John asked quietly. I see a foolish innocence. But it's also heroic, I stammered. They are paying real money, 25% of the value, just to protect their culture and their promise of quality. I have never seen this in any other commodity industry. This single act struck right at the heart of my prejudice. The grain of rice was not a soulless commodity. It was a carrier of national integrity and a commitment to responsibility. Mr. Bay had turned a quality failure into an opportunity to raise the bar. That was the crucial difference between growing to sell and growing to feed. While Mr. Bay and I were arranging the engineer's work, I approached them. Fook and the local villagers had managed to pull my car out of the mud, but my mind was still stuck. Mr. Bay, I called. He turned around, looking at me, tired but determined. Mr. Mark, is your car all right? My car doesn't matter, I said, summoning the courage to admit my foolishness. I apologize. I overheard your conversation. I said in the meeting that rice is a low-value commodity with no strategic role. You just taught me a lesson I never learned at Harvard or on Wall Street. Mr. Bay smiled faintly, a warm, slightly ironic smile. Mr. Mark, Vietnamese food is not just a meal, it is culture. And the grain of rice is not just a grain of rice. It feeds people. When you hold a grain of rice, you are not just holding 0.001% cadmium. You are holding the life and trust of millions of foreigners and our own people. That's why a grain of rice can never be a cheap commodity. If you accept a low standard today, you will accept a lower one tomorrow. That is not how we build this country, sir. Our resilience is not just in war. It's in every small detail of life in Vietnam. Even the 0.001% quality of a rice grain. I bowed my head. I felt the shock. This shock didn't come from a disruptive technology, but from the absolute integrity of a Vietnamese farmer. I realized that my plan to flatten the rice fields to build a chip factory was not turning a commodity swamp into digital gold as I thought. It was an arrogant ignorance that nearly destroyed a cultural and strategic treasure I failed to see. My arrogance was defeated. Now I had to find out what hidden power lay behind this extraordinary integrity. Following the shock of the 0.001% quality standard, I decided to postpone signing the land use conversion contract. I couldn't continue calling these fields a commodity swamp when the farmer was willing to incur massive financial losses just to protect his reputation and culture. I needed objective proof. Mr. Bay's integrity was phenomenal, but business cannot run purely on goodwill. There had to be something bigger behind this. I called John. Remember the former MIT student I tried to recruit to my firm? The guy who turned down Wall Street to be an agricultural scientist somewhere in Vietnam? Find him. I need a confidential meeting. That person was Dr. Koa, who had returned to Kanto to work at a national plant breeding institute. John had to pull every favor to arrange an evening meeting at a high-level, strictly secured agricultural lab. As I walked into the surprisingly cold and modern laboratory, I saw Koa standing next to a long row of test tubes and genetic analysis machines. "Welcome back," Mark Koa said. "Long time no see. Did you come here to buy rice fields?" His tone held a hint of irony. "I came here to understand. I just witnessed a farmer pay a heavy price for 0.001% quality. I'm trying to find the financial logic behind that madness. You need to prove to me that Vietnamese rice is not a cheap commodity." Koa smiled a cryptic knowing smile. "I won't use words. I'll use data." Koa led me to a large screen displaying a 3D model of a rice gene sequence. He began explaining the rice gene bank that Vietnam had been quietly building over decades. "You thought Vietnam only exported generic white rice. Your biggest Tat-Bai failure was not looking into their global food security strategy," Koa stated. He pointed to a highlighted gene segment. "This is our newest hybrid rice strain. We call it the Sustainable Dragon Rice, SDR. It has 4 times the salt tolerance of the best American rice strains and 3 times the drought resistance of Thai varieties. This is not accidental. Koa pulled up a shocking chart. It mapped out the projected food shortages in Africa and the Middle East over the next 20 years due to climate change and saltwater intrusion. Then, he overlaid another chart, Vietnam's global emergency food supply capacity. The graph showed Vietnam was not just a generic rice exporter. They were strategically positioning themselves as the gatekeeper of survival for vulnerable regions. Mark, look at this number, Koa emphasized. In 2024, Vietnam supplied over 10% of the imported rice to the most vulnerable African nations. If a major country suddenly faces a food crisis who has the resilient rice strains that can be deployed instantly, not the traditional agricultural powers, it's Vietnam. This is not a commodity, Mark. This is a strategic geopolitical asset, Koa declared, his voice echoing in the lab. As the world faces climate change, this grain of rice is the new oil, and Vietnam holds the proprietary gene code. I felt a chill not from the air conditioning but from the sheer scale of the revelation. I had looked at rice paddies and saw backwardness while beneath the surface they were building a global genetic data warehouse. But why? Why doesn't anyone know about this? I asked. If this is high-tech, why not market it widely? Why sell it as a cheap commodity product? That is the subtle wisdom of the Vietnamese culture, Mark. Hidden capability, Koa replied. They don't need fanfare. They let the quality speak for itself. And more importantly, they avoid the interference and control of major international organizations. They want to maintain strategic control over their food security and the world's. Koa opened a confidential file he was authorized to share with me. It was an internal analysis report. Shocking revelation 1 technology. Vietnam had developed an AI system for yield forecasting and pest management integrated into drones, achieving 98% accuracy, higher than any comparable system in the West. This was the digital gold I had been searching for. Shocking revelation 2 strategic vision. The Vietnamese government had quietly refused multiple multi-billion-dollar offers from multinational agricultural conglomerates to exclusively purchase the rice gene bank. The reason? They want to ensure Vietnamese rice remains available and affordable for poorer nations, especially those with traditional partnership ties. Do you see it, Mark? The farmer bay who was willing to lose 25% of his batch value is not naive. He is part of a comprehensive strategy where absolute quality is not a cost, it is a strategic weapon for building trust and influence. That is our life in Vietnam, the blend of tradition and secret technology. I remembered my words from stage 1. I don't see technology. I see traditional flooded paddies. Now I felt utterly short-sighted. I sat down trying to process the overwhelming information. I, a Wall Street investor who prided myself on analyzing global supply chains, was completely blind to one of the most strategically significant success stories in Asia. I looked at the ground and saw mud while you were looking at gene sequences and seeing the future, I confessed. My prejudice has been defeated. I have made one of the biggest third-by failures of my career. I almost destroyed a piece of a global strategic asset out of sheer arrogance. Hoa looked at me. You are a foreigner and an American, Mark. You look at profit. The Vietnamese look at resilience. For us, feeding ourselves and then feeding others, our overlooked friends, that is real wealth. That is the culture of giving. Do you know what shocked me the most, Khoa? Not the AI or the gene bank, but the political will to turn down billions of dollars from large corporations just to keep a promise of stability and aid to poorer nations. That's not business. That's philosophy. I looked out the laboratory window. I saw the green rice fields under the floodlights. They were no longer plots of land waiting to be leveled. They were the strategic bunkers of humanity, protected by the integrity of men like Mr. Bay and the intellect of men like Dr. Koa. I came to Vietnam to invest in chips, but I realized that investing in their rice was the most sustainable bet on the world's future. I came to build a factory. Now I wanted to protect what was already there. I returned to Can Tho, to that same cramped, non-luxurious conference room. This time I didn't arrive by helicopter or expensive SUV, but in a standard rental car. I wanted to arrive as a student, not an arrogant guest. I had called back the same people from the first meeting, Mr. Bay, the cooperative chairman, and the local officials. I also invited Dr. Kowa, even though he wasn't an investor. I sat at the head of the table, but this time I felt like the least knowledgeable person in the room. I asked John not to translate my speech into Vietnamese until I had finished. I wanted them to feel the sincerity in my tone. I began not with a greeting or a flowery introduction, but with a direct statement, almost a confession. I arrived here 3 weeks ago with the mindset of an arrogant Wall Street guy. I thought I could see through Vietnam through the lens of instant profit and obsolescence. I said Vietnamese rice was a low-value commodity, something we should pave over to make way for the high-tech future. I looked directly at Mr. Bay, who maintained an impassive expression. I was wrong. I made a terrible thought by failure in seeing the real power. And that mistake wasn't just a financial miscalculation. It was a failure of vision and humility. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard. I didn't draw financial charts. I wrote 2 large terms, 0.001% and Gini code. In the past 3 weeks, I have learned 2 lessons. The first lesson was from Mr. Bay, when he agreed to lose 25% of his batch value over a cadmium content difference of just 0.001% compared to the Swiss standard. I thought he was insane. But then I realized that wasn't madness. That was absolute integrity, an unwavering commitment to the culture and reputation of Vietnamese food globally. That wasn't a cost. It was an investment in global trust. I turned to Dr. Kowa. The second lesson came from Dr. Kowa and your rice gene bank. I saw your data, your AI technology, and your salt-resistant, drought-resistant SDR strains. My voice started to crack with genuine emotion. I looked at the ground and saw mud, but in reality I was looking at a global strategic asset. While the world fights over oil, you are quietly holding the climate-resistant gene code, something capable of saving hundreds of millions of foreigners from starvation. You don't just sell rice. You sell food security to the world's most vulnerable nations. I paused, taking a deep breath. I came here with the prejudice that Vietnamese agriculture was backward. I apologize. I was an arrogant American who failed to see that what I called backward was actually the resilient future of humanity. I am Mark. I confess. I have failed to see the true strength of Vietnam. I have failed to understand that true value lies not in what can be sold today, but in what can ensure life for tomorrow. And you, the farmers and the scientists, are the richest people in this room. You hold the key to life. A silence fell. John slowly began translating my every word. Mr. Bay and the officials looked at me with stunned surprise. They had prepared for a land negotiation, not a confession. After John finished translating, I presented my decision. This was the moment my personal change was converted into action. Firstly, the contract to purchase the 100 hectares of rice land to build a chip factory is officially cancelled. Secondly, I have completely changed my investment plan in the Mekong Delta. I pulled out a new contract document. I cannot flatten this strategic treasure. Instead, I want to become a part of it. I commit to investing $100 million USD into a new climate-resistant rice strain research and development fund. This fund will be managed by Mr. Bay's Tuan Tin Cooperative and Dr. Kowa's Research Institute. The offer caused a loud murmur in the room. $100 million. Not for chips, not for a factory, but for rice. I made the purpose crystal clear. This money is not intended for short-term profit for my company. It will be used to 1. Expand the rice gene bank, creating even better salt and drought-resistant strains. 2. Support foreigners in African and Middle Eastern nations by providing your newest rice strains free of charge for them to cultivate themselves. 3. Build an AI data management system for small farmers so they can consistently meet that 0.001% quality standard. I want to buy into your integrity, your vision. I want to be a stakeholder in the future of global food security, where I believe Vietnam is leading the way. I turn to Mr. Bay. Mr. Bay, I want to sign this agreement with you. I want you to teach me how to manage a business where compassion and absolute quality are prioritized over immediate profit. Mr. Bay walked over. He didn't look at the $100 million document. He looked into my eyes. Mr. Mark, you came here to buy land. Now you want to buy seeds. Thank you. Your admission of your thutbai is a more valuable investment than $100 million, because it shows you truly understand life in Vietnam. Mr. Bay placed his hand on my shoulder. Money is necessary, but vision is priceless. We accept this investment not because we need the money, but because we need a powerful voice like yours, a foreigner, to tell the world Vietnamese rice is not a cheap commodity. It is a weapon of peace, a bridge of life. From that moment on, I was no longer Mark the Wall Street investor who scorned agriculture. I was Mark the stakeholder in Vietnam's rice gene bank. This transformation was not just a change in my portfolio. It was a change in my nature. I had found my true purpose in the Mekong Delta, not in silicon and electronic chips, but in the mud and the grains of rice holding the climate-resistant gene code. I came to conquer. I stayed to serve.